When an industry is brand new, it's a lot like a gold rush. Everyone's rushing in. Growth is just explosive, and it feels like there's more than enough to go around. But what happens when the gold starts to run out? When that explosive growth grinds to a halt, that's when the real battle begins. And that's when competitive positioning stops being just a business school buzzword. It becomes a flat-out fight for survival.
So, have you ever wondered about this? In any given industry, why does one company become a household name, while another one, that seems pretty similar, just gets completely crushed and fades away? Well, I can tell you it's not about luck. It's all about choosing the right place to fight your battles. So, we're going to be talking about what happens when an industry hits maturity. This is that point where the market is pretty much full, that crazy growth slows way down, and the big players really start to lock in their positions. The whole game just changes.
Pretty much every industry goes through this life cycle. You start with the emergent stage, it's chaotic, lots of companies trying all sorts of new things. Then you get to the development stage where a winning formula appears and things just take off. But where we're focusing today is on that third stage, maturity, and it can be brutal. Because at this point, strategy isn't really about growth anymore. It's about staying alive.
And this is the fundamental shift, right? It's no longer about making the pie bigger. It's about grabbing a bigger slice of a pie that isn't growing. This is where a company's strategy gets put to the ultimate test, and where we really see the winners separated from the losers.
Okay, so if you're in this fight for your piece of the pie, what's your game plan? How do you even compete? Well, it turns out there's a classic playbook that breaks it all down into 4 fundamental strategies.
The entire map of competitive strategy is built on just 2 simple questions. First, on the vertical axis, you have competitive scope. Are you going after a huge, broad market, or are you targeting a very specific, narrow niche? Then, on the horizontal axis, you have competitive advantage. Are you going to win on cost, or are you going to win on being different?
So, up in the top left, we've got cost leadership. The mission here is simple: be the absolute most efficient producer for the mass market. This is a game of massive scale, of being ruthless with your costs, and just operational genius. Think about companies like Zara or Uniqlo. They're masters at this, getting trendy stuff out there at prices that are almost impossible to compete with.
Now in the top right, we have differentiation. You're still going after a broad market, but your weapon of choice isn't price. It's about being unique. You're offering something special. Maybe it's better quality, maybe a cooler design, or just a brand that people love and are willing to pay extra for. It's all about getting better profit margins because people believe your product is worth it.
Okay, now let's move down to the narrow market strategies. First up, focused differentiation. This is all about serving a super specific niche with a highly specialized premium product. Companies like Prada or Cartier, they aren't trying to sell to everyone, and that's exactly the point. They make huge margins on a pretty small number of sales to a really dedicated group of fans.
And finally, we have focused cost. Now this one's a little trickier to spot in the wild. It means being the low-cost option for a very, very small niche. You won't usually find global brands here. It's often regional players who found a small, super price-sensitive group of customers that the big guys just completely ignore. They win by being hyper-specialized on both their customer and their cost structure. All right, so you figured out your spot on the map. But knowing your own strategy, well, that's only half the battle. You also have to know who you're really fighting against. And spoiler alert, it might not be who you think.
This brings us to a really important idea called a strategic group. Basically, these are the companies that are playing the same game you are. They're targeting a similar customer with a similar advantage. And the competition inside a strategic group is absolutely fierce, while the rivalry between different groups is way, way lower.
Just think about the car industry for a second. Porsche and Mercedes are absolutely obsessed with what BMW is doing. Why? They're in the same strategic group. But do you think BMW loses any sleep over a new Ford sedan? Of course not. Ford and Fiat are playing a completely different game in a different part of the map. This really helps us see the difference between how a big leader and a focused specialist think. A leader like Coca-Cola uses what's called segmentation. They create Diet Coke, Coke Zero, Cherry Coke, you name it, to try and cover every single type of customer. But a specialist like Ferrari, they go after a true niche. They do one thing for one very small group of people, and they do it better than anyone else.
And just look at the visual contrast here. On one side, you've got Coca-Cola's mission to be absolutely everywhere, for everyone, in every possible shape and size. And on the other, you have Ferrari's laser-like focus on this one, single, uncompromising vision of performance. One strategy is to blanket the entire market. The other is to own one tiny but very profitable corner.
So you can be a broad leader, or you can be a focused specialist. But what happens if you try to be a little bit of both?
Well, that leads us to one of the most dangerous places you can possibly be in any industry, the stuck in the middle trap. Now, check out this U-shaped curve. This is really fascinating. It basically plots a company's product range against its chances of survival. And what you see is that the companies at the extremes, the huge market leaders and the super-focused niche players, they do great. But the companies stuck there in the middle with a medium-sized product line and no clear identity, they are in the valley of death. It is a total danger zone.
And this is the heart of the problem. If you're stuck in the middle, you don't have the scale and the low costs of the leaders, but you also don't have the unique appeal and high margins of the specialists. Your whole strategy is fuzzy, and you just end up getting squeezed from both sides.
For a really brutal, real-world example of this, just look at the smartphone wars. Back in 2010, the market was all over the place. You had iOS as the premium choice, and a rising Android as the low-cost leader. And then you had BlackBerry and Windows Phone trying to find some space in between. Fast forward to 2017, the market had completely consolidated. Android and iOS survived at the extremes, and all those players who were stuck in the middle wiped out. Their market share collapsed to pretty much zero.
So you might be thinking, okay, if I'm stuck in the middle, why don't I just, move, pick a better spot on the map and go for it? Well, it is almost never that simple. In a mature market, changing your fundamental position is one of the hardest things a company can possibly do. The reason it's so incredibly hard is that a company's strategic position is baked into its DNA. Everything about a low-cost leader, its supply chain, its culture, who it hires, is all optimized for one thing: efficiency. A niche player is built around craftsmanship and exclusivity. You can't just wake up one day and flip a switch. It would take a complete and frankly often impossible reinvention of the entire company.
And sometimes the very structure of an industry makes certain positions impossible to even exist. Take semiconductors. A new chip factory costs $15 billion, and it's basically obsolete in 5 years. Just to break even, you need an astronomical sales volume. There is simply no room for a small batch artisanal chip maker. The pure economics of the industry mean that only the massive scale leaders can even afford to play the game.
So you see, this isn't just some abstract diagram. It's a survival map for any crowded market. It explains why some brands become icons and others just become footnotes in a history book. And it leaves every single business with the most fundamental question there is. What is your place on this map? And maybe more importantly, can you actually defend it?